Door, close the door, maybe. Okay. So good evening, everyone. Simon Jacobson here. Speak to you about comfort zones. That's what we'll talk about. Are you able to get out of your comfort zone? Now, a comfort zone by definition is a comfortable place, right? That's what comfort means. It's a comfortable place, and the question is, what's wrong with it being in a comfortable place? Well, the problem with a comfortable place, of course, is that you could end up being trapped by the inertia of your routines and habits simply because that's what you're used to and comfortable with, and never take any risks and never challenge yourself to go beyond your natural or your comfortable boundaries. And as such, you may never really actualize your potential. So anyone that has achieved excellence in this world always goes hand in hand with going out of their comfort zone. So this is obviously a much more complicated topic than it appears, because if that's the case, and it makes so much sense that if you're not ready to try something new, you're not going to achieve new results. So why is it not so simple? Why doesn't all of us want to have new results? We always like to grow. We like to improve, we like to reach heights, great heights. The reason, of course, is not only because it's comfortable, but it's also because we're driven and we have psychological, we have fear, we have fears and other factors and other forces that impede our way and don't allow us to grow. So as a result, those fears and other psychological forces really keep us trapped from making any move. So usually what happens, as they say in the healing world, you have to hit rock bottom. Unfortunately, things have to spiral out of control to a point where you really have no choice. God forbid. And that's when people wake up sometimes. You see this with addictions, or with other types of trauma, or other type of unhealthy life experiences, that when things get to a point where you're totally out of control, that's when people begin to do something about it. Even then, sometimes not. Which is why, for example, a functional addict, as they call it, is much worse than a dysfunctional one. Because a functional addict is able to hold a job, is able to maintain certain semblance of order in their lives, when in truth there's something else in control. But regardless, what I'd like to address, of course, is that we don't have to hit rock bottom to be able to begin to get out of our comfort zones. And to begin with, this week's chapter, Torah chapter, I always like to take something from this week's chapter and address it in relevant terms. So we're talking about the third chapter in the book of Genesis. And this chapter is really the story of the first Jew. It's Abraham, the seeker, the pioneer, who in time would become the father of all nations, as the Bible puts. He'd become the founder and the pioneer of all faith and modern religion as we know it today. All began with Abraham, who rejected a pagan world in search of a transcendent God, in search of something greater than what is man-made. He understood early on in his life that there's something more deeper reality than that which human beings can create, and that we have two options in our lives. You either worship yourself or you worship something greater than yourself. And that the secret to all relationships, to love, to healthy, enduring happiness, is that you end up not worshiping yourself, but worshiping something beyond you. Because the self, for all its benefits, ultimately is also our greatest trap. Self can be selfish, narcissistic, driven by self-interest. And the great challenge, of course, is how does a person grow and have a loving relationship with another person, or with other people, if they're driven primarily or totally by self-interest. And Abraham understood this as a young child. Through a process of elimination, he came to discover that there's some greater and higher reality beyond the here and now. And this was the discovery of God. So in the first story, the first episode of Abraham's life, you have right here, in this week's chapter, opens up with God speaking to Abraham and saying the following words: Lech lecha ma'artzecha me'moladetecha me'beis avicha. These are the opening words. It's one of the most dramatic statements, especially considering this is like the first statement that Abraham hears from God. What does lech lecha ma'artzecha means? Leave your homeland, go on to yourself, leave your land, the place of your birth and the home of your parents. And it continues, I will turn you into a great nation. And go to the land that I will show you. I've discussed this verse many times in the class. Those who have been here before remember. If not, it's all recorded. You could always access it somewhere online on our website, whatmeaningforlife.com. And but I want to address an aspect that I've never really spoken about, I believe, at least not elaborated on. So briefly, the story here is, he's telling him, leave where you are, and technically, geographically, Abraham lived in what is modern-day eastern Iraq. Right? We have here a live specimen from Iraq. So southeastern Iraq. That's where he lived. And when God says, leave your homeland, and your land, and your homeland, and your place of birth, place of birth in the home of your parents, that's the place he left, and traveled northwest. So he traveled north along the Euphrates River to Iraq, and then west, which led him to what we call today Israel. Then it was called the land of Canaan. And that's a big part of this chapter, is Abraham's journey and reaching Canaan and all that happened subsequently. But the focus here is on these words, lech lecha, which means to leave. As we shall soon see, this is the first documented description of someone leaving their comfort zone, which explains a point that I've often emphasized here, the strange description. When you tell someone, you give someone directions to go somewhere, the thing you always emphasize is the destination. Because the point of departure, you know where you are, hopefully. At least physically you know where you are. Psychologically is another story. But you know where you are, so someone has to tell you, now go north, east, west, south, this street, this city, this street, this number, this cross street, etc. Here, God reverses the entire process. Where when it comes to the point of departure, the point of destination is very vague. Go to the land that I will show you. Where is that? South, north, east, west. When it comes to the point of departure, God elaborates with three different expressions. The land, the place of birth, and the home of your parents. Which essentially are redundant. I mean, they're not redundant literally. There is land and the birthplace and home of your parents. But it's all about where he was, where he was living. Because where Abraham was, all those three things applied. Now, those three things don't have to. I mean, you can be born in one place, your home of your parents can be in another place, and the land can be another. You know, there are different things. But here it happened to be all these three things were where Abraham was. So why the elaboration from where to leave from, and a vague statement about where to go to? So briefly, the answer is, I've discussed it many times, but here, as I said, I will talk about it more in the comfort zone context, is that this is a secret to all growth. What God was telling Abraham was not just a geographic, some type of GPS, the directions of how to go from here to there. You know, Abraham was a pretty intelligent man. God could have said to him, go to the land of Canaan, and he would figure out how to get there. What he was telling him was really the secret to real growth. How does one grow? How does one develop from a child to an adult? How does one develop from a psychological, emotional person driven by self-interest to someone of a pioneer? And the answer is that you have to get three things out of the way for you to ever grow. All of them go into one category. It's called one word, subjectivity. We are all subjective creatures. First thing one must acknowledge. Not ready to acknowledge that, very difficult to find any truth. You know, I always tell the classic story, and I'll tell it now, the Chelam story of the Chelam farmer. Chelam was this little town in Poland where they say intelligent people lived, but the neighbors were resentful, so they created this whole folklore of the fools of Chelam. You know, the equivalent of what they call Polish jokes or something like that. Or blonde jokes, or whatever it is. I mean, all these stereotypes. No offense, please. It's not what that's the stereotype out there. So the Chelam farmer lived in a small town, Chelam. So you can imagine the farm was even smaller. But this was his farm. It was a special farm to him. It was his baby. His baby, he inherited from his parents, who inherited from their parents, and all the way back. So he took care of every grain of soil. It was his own baby. One day, he receives a guest, a distant cousin coming from the United States, big world with their acres and acres of land. You know, if you ever go to Europe, it's quite, if I'm an American, first time going to Europe, you know, everything in Europe you basically can get to within 2-3 hours. In the United States, you know, from the West Coast to East Coast is 6 hours. It's a serious difference in space. The Chelam farmer receives his guest. This guest comes from a farm, big town farmer from Texas. He's also a farmer. Anyway, he gives them the royal tour of a Chelam farm, which didn't take long, you can imagine. And then they finally sit down to dinner, and he asks his cousin, so what do you think about my farm here in Chelam? So the cousin, you know, says to him, it's a very nice farm, it's nice and cute, it's so tiny. And the Chelam farmer, who never saw a farm that larger than his own, you know, was taken aback and says, what do you mean tiny? How big is your farm in Texas? So the cousin, how is he going to tell him, explain to him what our farm is, you know? So he gave him a metaphor, a way to explain it to him, a point of reference. So he says to his Chelam farmer, the Texan farmer says, well, let me put it this way. It takes all day for me to move my tractor, travel with my tractor from one end of the farm to the other. All day. And he thought that would give him like a sense. So the Chelam farmer smiles and feels compassion, empathy for his cousin, and says to his Texan farmer, don't feel bad. I once had a tractor like that too. You know? Now, it's a delayed reaction. You had a tractor like that too? Everybody has a tractor like that somewhere. And everybody's got a Chelam inside of them, as we shall see in a moment. The Chelam within. Okay, there's the child within, there's the Chelam within. So, you know, the Chelam farmer was not malicious, and he was not trying to be funny. He was being honest. He was objective, but objectivity, remember, is only relative to your perspective, which means you're really subjective. So if someone were to pass out a questionnaire to everyone here, everyone in cyberspace, everyone in the world, and ask the question, so are you objective or subjective? Are you open-minded or narrow-minded or closed-minded? How many people do you think are going to answer, I'm closed-minded, narrow-minded, and subjective? You know, because you see, part of subjectivity is it makes you think you're objective. Obviously. This Chelam farmer was also objective, but if it was qualified based on his experience. He couldn't even fathom a farm that size. So when someone said to him, his cousin said to him, the tractor takes all day to travel from one end to the next, for him it was clear that the tractor must be some old shmata jalopy like he once had, and to crank it up, to move from here to there, took all day. He didn't realize at all that it has nothing to do with the space. He couldn't fathom it. So subjectivity, as they like to say, in the world of growth, you say, there are things you know you don't know. And things you don't know that you don't know. Those, of course, are the real blind spots. There are many areas we don't know. If you need legal advice or business advice, it's not your forte. Most intelligent people, most sensible people go to someone who's an expert. Not always. We may not want to hear it. Medical issue or other things because of our own fears or denials. But most of us can understand, it's not in the area I know. I know I don't know this. I go to someone who may know better or does know better. But how many areas in our lives we don't even know that we don't know? Which means we won't go for help because we don't even know that we don't know it. And again, not necessarily malicious. It's not because we're in fear or denial or some major something like it. It could just be lack of experience. Little children, for example, don't even know that they need to go somewhere they can go somewhere for more help, or whatever it may be. So subjectivity is a very silent partner to everything we do in our lives. Everything. And I mean everything, 24/7. Everything is affected by our perspective. Now, what is intelligence? What is growth, maturity? Is, as I said, you try to see the things you don't know and try to supplement with someone who does know better. And the areas that we don't even know, we also maintain a measure of humility that it's always possible that you're not absolutely 100% sure, because there may be something you don't even know you don't know. That's how we grow. So it's not like we suddenly become no longer subjective, but we balance it with our intelligence, with a certain awareness that there are things that we may be blinded by. And especially areas in life that especially affect our emotions. Love, relationships, parents, family. Here there are a lot of deep-seated and deep-rooted feelings that affect us, for good or for bad. That blind us, that don't allow us to see certain things. So generally, a healthy growth doesn't mean that you have it all figured out, that you're perfect. That's impossible. But that you have a sense of self, and you know that some things you may be clear about, some things you're not so clear about. If you have that humility, and as I said earlier, you don't worship yourself, and therefore you don't worship your subjective conclusions as if they're absolutes, you're already in good shape. It's halfway there. Because there's always room for growth. This doesn't mean that you're always second-guessing yourself and doubting. It means that you have a certain perspective and understand that growth consists of, today you see these horizons, you climb them out and you'll see broader horizons. And you know that tomorrow will be new ones if you allow yourself to go there. So that's why, going back to what God tells Abraham, telling him the secret of all growth. You have to recognize subjectivity, and you have to recognize its force, its effect on us, impact on us, and that when you are able to transcend that and leave, that's lech lecha, leave these three types of subjectivity, you will begin to grow. You'll begin to discover the real you. And what are the three types of subjectivity? Three general categories. One is just inherent natural self-love. We're all biased when it comes to ourselves. We minimize our own weaknesses. Someone else, the same weakness, you'll see it much more amplified. We all have our natural biases, natural by birth, especially regarding ourselves. Self-love tends to cover up, or tends to minimize, or tends to distort certain perspective on things. That's one. That's your place of birth. That's the natural birthright, the natural subjectivity we all have. Again, it's not a bad thing per se. It happens to be necessary for survival. Because if you wouldn't care about yourself, you would not protect yourself. You could be hurt. You can become a doormat, and so on. But at the same time, you also know the limitations of self, which is knowing that self-interest can blind you anytime. The second type of subjectivity is one that comes from parental influences. That's Beis Avicha, the home of your parents. We will never know the impact and the influences of our parents on us, because it affects us long before we were even aware. From the earliest age, as soon as you're born. Their attitudes to things, how they react, their tools, lack of tools, how they love, how they react to crisis. These things have very profound impact on us in our most impressionable years. So that's the second form, that subjectivity that affects us. In other words, can distort or blind or somewhat cloud our judgment. And the third, again, this doesn't mean that it's all bad, because our parental influences could also be very positive ones. Healthy parents teach us tools, teach us mechanisms, teach us ways to solve problems. But we have to know that this affects us very deeply. And finally, the third level of subjectivity is social pressure, peer pressure. And that's artzacha, that's your land, your culture, your climate, your environment, the world in which you live. And that too affects us very deeply, maybe more than we may know. Peer approval, you don't want to be different, you want to be cool, you want to fit in. Even when you don't want to fit in, it's also with certain rules of how people fit in, don't fit in when they, how people are so-called out of the box, in the box type of thing. So there's a whole culture that puts a lot of pressure on us on many levels. I'm not even referring to just friends and so on. There's the media, there's the advertising, there's the marketing, there's the whole inundation of everyone trying to vie for our attention, trying to grab a piece of us that is constantly thrusting at us all types of messages. If you do this, you look better. You do that, you'll feel better. You do this, buy this, So we live in a culture. So these three forces are what God tells Abraham. You want to find yourself, who you are, independent of these three factors, you have to leave these three forces of influence as much as possible. As long as a child lives, for example, in your parents' home, you can't really know who you are, which is why the first time we, let's say, go to summer camp, or we go to school, or we leave home, it may not be very comfortable. The first time, especially if it's a healthy home. I know some people can't wait to leave home, but I'm talking about a healthy environment. It's uncomfortable. Every child will cry the first time they go to school, and parents find it difficult. But that's where you begin to discover yourself, because you're no longer in the shadow of your parents. So there's a side to it that somewhat, you could say, has fear. Is fear involved, but on the other hand, that's where you begin to discover yourself. So basically, Abraham is told to leave these three forces and discover yourself. So the destination is not that key here as much as what to leave from. Because once you free yourself from subjective factors, you will find what you need. Which is interesting. Many times you're told, keep your focus on the destination. No end in mind. And then you'll find your way. Sometimes it's the other way around. You can have the end in mind, but you can never get there because there are heavy baggage that you carry from your past, from your subjective forces that don't let you move properly. So that's a summation of this opening verse. But let's address it in the context of the comfort zone thing. The comfort zone. I think in Arizona, they make all these little retirement villages they've been developing in the last decades. So there's all these interesting names of towns. I was there. I found it pretty fascinating, like Carefree, Arizona, and there's probably a Comfort Zone, Arizona, Paradise, Arizona, type of thing. It's almost like, well, I guess it's maybe a twisted take on what Mark Twain said about Manchester. He said Manchester is a great place to live before you die because it makes the transition easier. So I guess Arizona retirement villages create a type of paradise, carefree, that type of life. I always found it quite ironic because it's like almost disturbing actually. It sounds so beautiful. And you could just do nothing. You're carefree. But is this really healthy for the human spirit to be carefree? Not to say that any of us should have overwhelming anxiety, but what would a human being be without a little angst, without a little restlessness? We'd have total animal bliss. I don't know if there's a town called Animal Bliss, Arizona. That would be nice. I don't know who would want to buy a place in Animal Bliss, Arizona, right? Bliss. But bliss may be good. So, you see, this comfort zone thing is extremely, on one hand, it sounds so innocuous, but the truth is it happens to be one of our biggest enemies. When you read about Steve Jobs, who's captured the imagination of this generation, after his death especially, and before as well. You see a person not getting into his personality, complicated childhood and life for sure. But he's a pioneer, no question about it. A genius of sorts. And in some ways, not necessarily a genius, let's say, like an Einstein or some other brilliant minds, but a genius in a certain fashion, and definitely did things that others didn't approve of. Went out of his comfort zone. So some analyze it because he grew up in an environment where he never really had comfort in the first place. People who grew up in situations where he never really knew who his biological parents were, or something like that. Stuff like that. People like that sometimes create radical changes because they don't have the luxury of comfort zones. So does that mean we all have to somewhat suffer in a certain way to bring on change? As I said earlier, we don't have to. That's why we're told in this chapter that you can leave your comfort zone if you set your mind to do so. You don't have to hit rock bottom. You don't have to suffer. And everything has to be taken away from you before you create revolution. There's no question in history, many of the great revolutionaries, if you study their lives, it began with pain. It began with loss. They didn't just become revolutionary in a vacuum. It came from a place that they had a serious deprivation, and that was a catalyst. I see sometimes Holocaust survivors. In Australia, there's a per capita largest population of Holocaust survivors, but in other places as well. After the war, they had this motivation, many of them, to succeed. That was their vengeance. They were not going to go down. And that was a driving force. That doesn't mean that, and it's no question driven very much by the losses. When you see, when a lot is taken away from you, sometimes it can motivate you to do some great things. But here we have in this chapter that Abraham was not stripped of his life before lech lecha. God tells him you can do a lech lecha before you lose things. And that's the real challenge. How do you motivate yourself to go out of a comfort zone when you're comfortable? When you're uncomfortable, obviously. I have to tell you very honestly, since this recession, or whatever, the economic meltdown, however it's named, some call it the death knells of capitalism. The last few years, there's no question. I know I travel, I speak, I lecture, I write. There's a much more receptivity to a spiritual message. For one simple reason. Because when you're secure in your financial security, you think you have security and your money is working, you're just not really receptive to anything else. You think you're comfortable. You think you have it all made. Today, when everybody recognizes, even people of wealth, that there's a lot of uncertainty, and we don't know what kind of world our children will be inheriting. And there's things that anything can happen at any given moment. Basically volatility is now the norm. We all know. There's a certain unconscious or even conscious sense of restlessness. Even more than restlessness, I would say fear. And when people are in fear, their regular security blankets and comfort zones have been shaken. They're much more receptive. Now trust me, it's not like something I'm looking for, to thrive on other people's misery. But the fact is, it's very obvious to me. I'll tell you something even more. After September 11th, I saw it as well. After September 11th, not just the day after, or the week, or the year, ever since, a whole different change. And I say this as a witness. I actually demonstrate. I saw it. For example, if in September 10th, 2011, giving a lecture on a topic like Abraham and Yishmael and the roots of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish confrontations, most people weren't interested. After September 11th, there's this newfound interest in biblical ideas, in religious fanaticism, in religion and modernity, topics that I've always lived with and always addressed, but it was more academic before then. Now it became real because the world is shaken. So it's very clear, very, very obvious, that when people's so-called security blankets, the things they think they could have relied on, their infrastructures, are shaken, that's where there's always an opening. Now, as I said, I definitely, and the Torah and Judaism does not advocate looking for weaknesses. The Torah actually tries to teach us to access deeper security, not when you are comfortable, but that requires a certain strength, certain truth. See, Abraham was a truth seeker. He didn't need a crisis to search. He was searching for truth even when Wall Street was going well. Okay? And that, of course, is a much rarer type of individual. That's why there's only one Abraham. He's a true pioneer. But all of us, no matter what we are, we don't have to wait for that rock bottom. We don't have to wait till everything is shaken up to understand that true security can never come from anything that is man-made. So to analyze a bit more this comfort zone thing, what exactly is a comfort zone? When a child is 9 months in its mother's womb, it's very comfortable there. For the child, at least. For the mother is another story. Very comfortable. The child has everything it needs. Doesn't have to pay for anything. The foods are all refined. A child is protected from infections. It's fed, it sleeps, it does everything it needs to do. Completely protected. So 9 months of our lives, at least, we were completely protected. Everything after that was downhill, I understand. Then we're born. We're born into this world. The umbilical cord is cut. No longer can your sustenance come from your mother directly. Now you need to be fed. Obviously, early years of our lives, you grew up in a healthy home. It's somewhat of a continuation of the womb. Not in the physical sense, but in the practical sense. A newborn child cannot take care of itself, so healthy parents provide for the child. And as the years roll on, we start growing into, children start developing. Slowly, a child begins to develop a sense of self, becomes more self-reliant, begins to meet friends, begins to realize there's a world of life outside of the womb, outside of its home, and so on. That's it. And then as we grow into adolescence, and then to adults, it takes several years, but we finally grow into adults. At some point, we leave the home, and we become, as I said, self-reliant, dependent on yourself. To find your own food, to find your own comfort, your own shelter, your own home, your own bed, and build a life. Hopefully, a healthy individual will find a soulmate and begin to build a home and provide that same comfort for the next generation. This all sounds great on paper, and here we have Mark and Rebecca are embarking on this journey. I'm just using, this is a laboratory of sorts. So, and then we have Michaela and Miguel engaged to be married, right? So I want to point out there are people actually, hooking up in New York, and with the intention of getting married and so on, building eternal lives. Listen, it's somewhat of a novelty. What can I tell you, right? Right. May the love spread. Okay. So, I hope you don't mind my, it's good news, right? So, hey, listen, this doesn't mean you should always come. So I didn't mean to do any embarrassing here, right? Okay. So where does it get complicated? It gets complicated because not everything is healthy in this whole process. If our parents were perfect, and the world was perfect, and our society was perfect, so we'd have definitely a situation where, as we grow and become independent of the womb, we have an environment that is equally nurturing. That's the problem. It's not equally nurturing. And then we start facing, as I mentioned, self-interest. So other people's self-interest begin to conflict with our self-interest. So when you're in your mother's womb, no matter how selfish your mother may be, simply biologically, by the fact of biology, that child will be protected and sustained. God forbid, I don't want to even mention it, but there are, of course, exceptions. Mothers can ingest certain substances that can, of course, hurt their child. But we're talking about in certain normal circumstances. I remember, was here in this class, someone had told me that a little girl, her mother was pregnant, and she, from the mouth of babes, you hear sometimes wisdom from children. So the little girl looks at her mother and says to her mother, "Mommy, how is it that you have room inside of you for another life?" And when I heard it, it struck me. It was quite powerful. I said to myself, men don't even have room outside of themselves. Forget about inside themselves. And here, a woman for 9 months is subject. It's not like one little section of her body. The whole body is occupied by another life that affects everything. I could only imagine it. I know today they have all kinds of, I guess, mechanisms where men can simulate the feelings of what pregnancy is like. Now, some wives says that their men, like, they put on these things that put the pressure on their liver and on their kidneys and stuff like that. It's some ridiculous thing. It's some type of bonding. Men want to feel the experience. I'm not advocating that. I just mentioned it. You can Google it, I'm sure. Today there's one of everything, So it's interesting insight, because perhaps it's true that a woman, God blessed her for theologically this way, because psychologically, and she also is able to contain differently than a man can. But that's, I don't want to digress here. It's another subject matter that you can use when you're discussing relationships and stuff like that. Who's giving more and who's taking more, etc., who's leaving more space, etc. But regardless, the point I was leading to was that our independence always comes with a measure of pain. So the most comfortable place, of course, is when everything is protected and taken care of you. But would that really be an aspiration for a human being? On one hand, when we're struggling to make ends meet and we try to pay our bills, and we have to deal with obnoxious clients and employers and the whole corrupt world around us, we all dream of just having enough money to be able to lock yourself up somewhere, you don't need anybody, and not have to be exposed to all these compromises and negotiations that we all go through to survive. And just be able to just have enough money for a lifetime vacation, never have to work the rest of your life. But most people, if they were basking on a beach for too long, would also find themselves restless. In other words, is it really an aspiration for us to return to the womb, to someone else taking care of all of our needs? So on one hand, yeah, you'd love it. But what would happen with you? I see one of the great painful things to see often is children who have a sense of entitlement grew up in homes that they were given everything, and often spoiled, given without any discipline. No question, in many cases, situation like that, can't say there aren't exceptions, but in many cases the real challenge is called emasculation, where a child that grown up in that type of environment grows into an adult, never really having to earn, and creates illusions of importance because they have the ability to buy anything. Like the great luminary Oscar Wilde said, there are people who know the price of everything but the value of nothing. And so you can create the illusion of success and power when really you didn't earn one penny. And there's a big distortion there because it's not really coming from a place of true earning. There's a Talmudic expression that captures it. Adam reitze b'kav shalei yeseh mitisha kav mishal chaver. A person wants one measure, has more pleasure, and desires one measure that you've, like $1 that you've earned, more than $9 that you're given as a gift. Now, of course, $9 can buy 9 times as much as 1. And 9 million can buy 9 times as much as 1 million. However, you still desire the one. That's what the Talmud says. Because there's something precious when something you've earned it. You will protect it more. You won't blow it that quickly. And above all, it's a fruit of your labor. They tell this analogy, one of the analogies that there was this, in the olden days they had these, what they called poritzes. These were big landowners who could do whatever they want. They could buy anybody. So one of them was once driving by in his carriage with horses, driving by a farm, and he sees a worker, sees a farmer working in the farm, another farm story. And he looks and he sees the farmer who's like using what's called the scythe, right, to cut the grain or so on. Cut, good word, cut, right. And he was very taken by the movements because it was like almost like poetic to him. The way he was swaying with the scythe, it was like he mastered the art. And it was a hot day in the sun. He sees him working hard. He's watching him. Then he finally comes over. He sends over his messenger to call the farmer over. And he says, "Listen, how much do you make working in this field?" "Oh, he barely earned just a few, what they call in Russia, kopkas, pennies. for doing this. He says, I'll pay you 10 times whatever you make, and no more working in the sun. I just need 1 hour a day. You come into my palace, and you just do the same movements so I could just watch it. You know? I mean, it's an analogy. Guy can buy anything, he said. Anyway, okay, hey, sounds like a good deal. 10 times as much for 1 hour a day in a nice, beautiful palace. No sun, no heat, no... You know, he'll make more money. By all means. After a day of doing it, the farmer says to the parrots, he tells him, I can't do this any longer. So he says, why not? You know, it's a much easier job. He says, but I don't see any fruits of my labor. And he could not continue. Because it wasn't about how hard it worked. You see fruits. You're ready to work hard. You don't see fruits. There's no point in the exertion, even if it's a much simpler exertion. Because there's something about the human being that needs to create, that needs to produce. And there's actually a very fascinating concept in this sense, that the Talmud says in the Yerushalmi, in Jerusalem Talmud, it says, when a person receives something unearned, it's called nema d'chsufa, bread of shame. We have shame about something we haven't earned. Yeah, we'd all love it. We all love gifts. But if you lived only on gifts, psychologically and unconsciously, somewhere in your psyche, there's a real, profound shame. And you will hide it and mask it, and you could maybe do a great job, but it never goes away, because a human being needs to produce. And when a person doesn't produce, there's something that is missing from our souls. And the reason for it is actually a very beautiful reason. It's because God wanted us to be like God, to be creators. Not just receivers, not just takers, but givers. So you know that joke, the Frisco Kid movie, you know that one with, who's it, Gene Wilder or whatever, one of these guys. Is a Jewish guy, huh?
Gene Wilder.
Right. So it's a comedy, whatever, there's Jewish chassids traveling from east to west. Bottom line is, there's a scene there where there's a train robbery. So the train robber, gets onto the train, points a weapon at everyone, gets their money, their jewels, and everything. Right before he jumps off the train, he tells them, listen, remember the lesson in life. It's always better to give than to take. You know? And then he proceeds to jump off with all their jewelry, So, and it happens to be true. Even though taking may be, like they say by many different things. They say sometimes you do something, at the moment it feels good, but a little while later it doesn't feel so great. And there are other things that at the moment doesn't feel so great, but later it feels very good. Like anything that really is destructive is usually at the moment it may be a moment of passion, but then later it's nothing special, maybe even negative feelings. But good things, if you were asked tomorrow morning to wake up 5 o'clock in the morning to volunteer to go help someone, our inclination is I'd like to sleep another hour, maybe you can find someone else. And later you may not feel so good about it. Maybe I should have gone. And if you did get up, so the moment, maybe you felt a little tired and you got out of bed, but there's no question later in the day you will feel good at what you did. This is a common rule. And the same thing is here. Taking is always more pleasurable at the moment. Taking, I keep on taking. As I said, 9 months a child takes. But giving is what our natural soul is really made, is really created for. And it's not some superimposed thing. It's natural to the human spirit to be a giver, to be a creator. And as a result of that, we have to be able to go out of our comfort zone. So comfort comes from taking, and growth comes from giving. And giving always means that you have to go out of your natural routine and habit. Because the habit of any creature is to sustain itself. Me. Narcissistic survival. That's the nature, that's the rule of science. Survival of the fittest. The species must sustain itself. But I'm not talking now about other species now, mineral, vegetable, animal, we'll talk about us humans. Humans have a spirit. And as we read 2 weeks ago in the beginning of Genesis and Bereshis, we are created in the divine image. And just as the divine creates, we have the power to create. And it's actually the greatest gift given to us. Because we're the only creatures on earth that create. Now this doesn't mean that animals and other kingdoms don't have the power to do beautiful, great things. But we have the ability to go out of our routines. And there's no creature on earth that can do that. A leopard will never change its spots, and a tiger its stripes. And every creature has its rules. follows a clock. The sun rises a certain way. They will never digress. They will never waver from the clock. A human being can waver. We can go both ways. We can be destructive or we can be constructive. We can destroy the world around us or we can transform it. And as a result, we have the power to create. But the condition is you cannot stay in your own comfort zone. As long as you do, you will never create. Because creation means going outside of what is existing. Just to reshape what you have and just do another version of it is yesterday's life. So this is the interesting paragraph. It's actually a battle, frankly. It's a battle. Because who wants to willingly go out of your comfort zone? Why would you go out of your comfort zone? If you had the option, you could stay in your mother's womb for 90 years. Why 9 months? But thank God no one asked you. But as the Alter Rebbe wrote, as the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, responded to his mother-in-law. She was a very fine woman. When he married, she was a great, great sage, great scholar, the author of the Tanya. And they moved off to a town, but they lived in poverty. So his in-laws said to him and to his wife, to their daughter, why don't you live in our town, and you'll have everything you need. All your needs will be provided for. You can study, pray, write, teach, do whatever you want. We will not disturb we'll support it all. Remember those days there was no wiring money and all kinds of other stuff like that, or credit cards. Can you believe it? There was once a time where you didn't have that. And so either you lived in the town with your wealthy in-laws or you didn't. Anyway, the Alter Rebbe responded as follows. He said, it's a very enticing offer. Provide everything. And he trusted them. It wasn't like they would meddle in his life because they were supporting them. They were holy people themselves. They just wanted to make his life more comfortable. And his response was, it's a very enticing offer. However, it's even more enticing, even more for us to go back to our mother's wombs. Because there everything is taken care of. There's only one small problem, two small problems. The space, meaning the womb, the space has gotten too small, and the child has gotten too large. That was his response to his mother-in-law. Now, it wasn't just another mother-in-law. She was, as I said, a very fine woman. She understood. Now, what he was saying was, not that he was choosing a life of difficulty. In the journey of life, above all, the key is to produce, to create. And when you're on a mission, you do whatever it takes. He was on a mission. And that mission overrode all the discomforts. It didn't matter to him. His mission was what mattered, and that mission was what he was on. God blessed him with a parnasa, with livelihood and wealth. That would have been great. And he didn't. But the mission for him was his wealth. I mean, obviously, not everyone's focused in that particular way, but you can appreciate and understand people who have a certain sense of purpose, and that's what drives them. And they want to produce. And as a result, they have no fears. Because let's now go to the fear element. Why is it that we have fears to get out of our comfort zone and routines? Because after a while, taking gets very comfortable, as I said. It's easy. And as you become a taker and you remain a taker, your fears just get deeper and deeper. Because then you wonder, can I really give? Do I have what to give? Will I maybe fail? And once you get used to, as they say, the known evil, why try something unknown? It may not even look like evil. So when a person is in their routine or habits, the problem is that what happens is, it's like every day that you don't try something new, it becomes more difficult to try something new. That's where you'll find, for instance, in coaching, even athletic coaching in any sport or other type of coaching, you'll see when a guy or a woman or a man or woman get into a funk, into like a trap where they psychologically suddenly have a block. You have sometimes these world champs, tennis champs, other sports and so on, and they get into some type of block. Something happens. It could be an injury, it could be just a mood, and so on. You'll see a good coach doesn't let it fester. You immediately have to challenge it. Obviously you have to give a person time if they have a reason, if there was an injury to heal and so on. But psychologically, because every day you don't fight it, the inertia begins to build. And just like medically, physically, there's a thing called atrophy. Atrophy when a person is lying in bed, God forbid is immobile, or the other situation that they can't move. Every day the muscle begins to atrophy. And the same thing is psychological. That's why they say that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But the same thing is the other way around. That which doesn't make us stronger kills us. That which does, in other words, there's no such thing as just being neutral. You're either going up or you're going down in life. Because when a day passes and you just have what you had yesterday, that's not equal, because the day has been lost. People think if I only maintain my equilibrium that I had yesterday, that's fine. That's not fine. You lost a day or a week. But sometimes in life, because we've been hurt, often what we do is we lower our standards and we lower our expectations. And like often I hear, and it can it tears my heart out and makes you cry. People tell you, I've heard this from more than one person tell me, if I go by a day and I don't feel beat up, it's already a success. When a person is beat up long enough, not to be beat up, that becomes an achievement. And I understand where they're coming from, but it makes you cry because that's what happens. We start lowering our standards. Someone tells me that if the phone rang all day and nobody called to yell at me, I feel like relieved. That's like success. And then, of course, real success is that you actually achieve something, you advance. That day you become something that's changed for the better than the day before. So it all makes sense in our minds, but our hearts is where fear dwells and lurks. And when the fear takes over, the invisible force of it is very, very difficult to fight, because it's not like an obvious enemy. It's not like fear suddenly pops up in the morning and say, hey, listen, today we're going to be afraid. It's a insidious force that just like eats away like a cancer, that just paralyzes. And it's not even that loud. It's not like fright where you start trembling and you're afraid. The worst type of fear is that silent fear, where you just don't make a move. And you can have all the excuses in the world. The bottom line, the excuse is because you don't want to risk it. You're comfortable, or at least you convince yourself you're comfortable, and you don't want to fail. You're afraid. So the only real response to that is that you have within you the strengths to achieve great things. If you don't have that confidence, obviously, what's the alternative? The alternative is fear. The counter force to fear is knowing confidence that you have what it takes. Which is why, in this entire story, starting with Abraham, before we even get to lech lecha, the Torah has to establish that a human being was created in a divine image. You're a piece of God. You have something that is godly. You have something that can change the world. And just as God created, you can create. That's like a very empowering statement. When's the last time you heard that? It's not something we hear every day. The truth is, most of the messages we hear, as I said earlier, is because somebody wants to sell us something. So if you have this, you're going to look more beautiful. And if you have that, you're going to have your status will go up. And if you have that, you're going to feel good. Which really is telling you that if you don't have it, you're worthless. That's really the message. But they can't put it that way, because no one's going to go buy a product and say, if you don't have this product, you're worthless. So they say the image is always the positive one. You want to look like that? This is the type of. I remember that time I was traveling. I think I told the story here more than once. I was asked, unfortunately, to speak at a shloshim, which is a 30-day memorial. After 30 days someone was passing, we commemorate it after 30, called a shloshim. Shloshim means 30. So I was in the Upper West Side, and I was wondering what I'm going to speak about. And as we're driving up the West Side Highway, I got my speech all ready for me via a big billboard that was somewhere like West Side Highway and 56th Street or something like that, a little earlier. Big billboard that said like this. It was a billboard, an advertisement for Newport cigarettes. Newport cigarettes. Okay. And you had these two beautiful faces, a man and a woman. You never saw such white teeth in your life. You never saw such a beautiful smile. Everybody would want to look like that. Whitest teeth. And they're large, on a billboard, like big teeth. And it says on top, alive with pleasure. I remember it vividly. And then below, of course, the prerequisite box that has to be large enough that everyone can see it. That smoking kills and whatever, maims, the whole, which of course itself is absurdity in the fullest sense of the word. They're spending millions of dollars to put that is going to kill you, and people buy it because the picture looks good. Even though, that's human beings for you. And And I think thinking to myself, here you go. Those teeth, nobody has such white teeth. That's just completely ridiculous, especially a smoker. And they don't show you a picture of their lungs, a real picture of what the lungs look like. So it's all about image, creating an image, and you want to look like that. And there's no question those cigarettes sell, or else they wouldn't be paying the millions of dollars for such advertising. That's obvious, I hope I don't offend anyone here. Does anyone work for Newport or, as they say, you can't join, sweepstakes if you're an employer or something. Well, I'm not an employee. I could say what I want here about it. But the point is, it was for me a perfect contrast of what real life is. Not to go into what my talk was about. I talked about that. I said, so what does it mean to be alive? And I'm alive with pleasure. Newport wants to tell us one thing, and the Torah tells us something else. So it all comes down to really how we perceive ourselves. And you have to remember, we are living in a time of war. And I don't mean war in Afghanistan and Iraq or in other parts of the world. There's a war right now for your psyche, for your soul. And I don't mean necessarily one person has some conspiracy. The war is, are you going to be an empowered person that can get out of the box and take a journey that's outside your comfort zone, or you can't? And don't kid yourself. Every second, somebody is sending you a message. The messages of most of the modern media, and I'm not fire and brimstone trying to attack all advertising, but most of the message is that you're not as worthy unless you buy this and this product. You will not hear messages that birth is God saying that you matter, that you're a piece of God, that you can create, that you can do anything you want to do. You'll hear that message if they sell you a book or a CD or something that will tell you how to do that. But just to say that you have it in you without anybody giving you anything, selling you something, no one's interested in giving you such a message. And subliminally, this also means something in the contrast. It subliminally means that if you don't have all that, you don't really have strength. So in a strange way, this so-called freedom that we experience, with all the information revolution, and being inundated by advertising and advertising and advertising, really, in my opinion, no question, subtly, and maybe not so subtly, overtly, feeds insecurity within us. There's no question. It feeds insecurity because it gives you all these options. Most of it you can't access anyway. So you're left feeling inadequate. You're left feeling less. You're left feeling, if I don't have enough money or I don't have enough possessions, I'm not as good as somebody else. And that's the type of material-driven society that we live in. That's why, thank God, there's a Torah that gives us a completely alternative script to your life. And that is, it's about you. Number one is you were created in the divine image. You have every resource within you to change the world in some way. Everyone here. And you don't have to depend on someone else for that. You have it all within you. But it requires making a move. And Abraham was told to make the move almost around 3,800 years ago. This week's chapter, lech lecha. He was 75 years old, Abraham. And he was 75 years old. You can imagine he was a spiritual giant at that point. And still he had to make a move. Couldn't stay in his hometown to really grow. And you'll see all great pioneers all make a move. And they make a move not when it may be risky, and when others say maybe this is not the way to go. This doesn't mean just being reckless. It means being informed, but an informed move. And this is the option we all have. Only you can decide whether you're going to stay in your comfort zone or you're not going to stay in it. All the forces and all the voices, the natural ones, will gravitate to comfort. That's how it is. But the real human being, the real soul, spirit, always wants something outside of it. We like someone once told me, why can't I have the best of both worlds? Why can't I stay comfortable and also be a pioneer? It's very nice. The only way you can do that is by going back into your mother's womb. Okay? And try to create something there. So you'll have everything you need, but you're not creating anything. So this is the two options that each of us have. So how do we get out of this? How do we get out of a rut? How do we get out of a trapped place? As I said earlier, there's really two ways. One way, unfortunately, which is what we shouldn't wait for, is when there's a crisis. Something forces you out of it. And you have no choice. This can be many different types of crises that force people out of that comfort zone. And then there's usually an opening. Leonard Cohen puts it, thanks for the cracks, because that's how the light gets in. but he was a man that has many cracks, and we don't always have to wait for the cracks. The other way is, like we read in this chapter, you're commanded to do so. This is your calling. And that every morning you wake up, and you say, Modani, I acknowledge to God. I acknowledge to you. We don't even say the name of God. For returning my soul to me, you're also making a commitment to your soul that you're going to do something that is radical, that you're going to dare to be yourself, and not just a product of someone else, or of society, or environment, or your own subjectivity, or your parental influences, and so on. This is an active choice we all have the power to make. Now obviously being around people that make such choices is always going to be helpful. Being around people who don't make such choices is actually detrimental, because when you're around others that are in their comfort zones, it's a very good excuse to say, hey, look, I'm not worse than anyone else. But when you're around people who have that type of drive, it is is one of the excellent ways to get yourself going. So that's one suggestion. Is find yourself someone, a friend, someone, a mentor, or someone that can help you, kick you in the pants. Maybe you kick them as well, each other, and to get things going. But then there's also the building of the confidence. That's, I think, in the long term, the most important thing of all. Because if you don't have it, the confidence, then you're not just going to do it. You can't force yourself. The confidence is ultimately that gives you the ability to try it, to do it. I remember when I began my so-called writing career years ago, and I was sitting, those days it was a typewriter. I remember I was writing my first piece that was like serious. I had a deadline, the works, and it was actually a Farbrengen from the Rebbe, and it was something from memory, and I didn't have I had to get it done, and I was sitting all Saturday night, and honestly, I was rolling ball. The first pages, I probably had 60 versions that went into the wastebasket. When you do something, you just pull it out, and you turn it into a ball, and you throw it into the wastebasket. So one after the other. At some point, I was really feeling like I'm never going to get out of this mess. Maybe I can't do this. Maybe I just can't. Maybe delusional. I convinced myself I can do it. And I remember my father, who was a writer himself, and spent sometimes in the wee hours. He got up early, and he sees me agonizing. And I remember he told me something that I'll never forget. It wasn't as a father, it was as a writer to a writer. So he said to me, look, it's going to be murder. It's going to be difficult. Now you'll think it's impossible. But you keep hammering away, and you'll finally get that first page the way you like it. And the rest of your life, always know it's always going to be difficult. But the only thing that will change is that you know you can do it, because you did it the first time. And it's absolutely true. Till this day, no matter how much technique, how much experience you have with it, and this is true across the board, it's not just writing, it's whatever anyone here is good at. It's always difficult when you're really doing something that's an achievement. I'm not talking about doing something automatic pilot. We all get away with doing something, but you want to do something that is going to be different, unique, a message. As a writer, you look for something that's new, something innovative, and so on. It's always difficult. But the difference is, that the breakthrough will come. And the frustration is all part of the process. So you have the confidence. It's like running the marathon and knowing you can make it, even though that moment you're like out of breath, you don't feel you can do it. And at some point, you get into that zone, and really what comes down to is that your training ultimately is what gives you the confidence to know that you can do it. Look at armies. They train soldiers. 99% of the time those soldiers in training will never be used in actual battlefield, thank God. But if they didn't have the training, throw them into a battlefield without it, you won't have any soldiers. You won't have anyone with confidence. So it's critical. The training, whatever it is that we do, it's like what it teaches you is the confidence that when you're thrown into the ring, you can do it. And that is ultimately really a critical component. So the question is, how do we build confidence seminars here, programs that build people's confidence? And it starts with, obviously, no one can give it to you. It's really teaching you that you have it inside of you, because that's real confidence. As soon as someone can give you the confidence, that itself is not so confident. So I always find it ironic when you hear about these books that say you hear 10 ways to achieve confidence. And then when you finish reading it, you start to realize, one second, someone else is telling me how to achieve confidence. Does that make me more confident in me? Or confident in the writer that told it to me, So it's about really recognizing that you have within you all the strengths you need, and that you have the ability to create something. Now, will everyone be an Einstein or a Steve Jobs? It doesn't matter. This is not about dramatic fireworks or how many numbers of people you reach, millions or billions. It's about an impact that you can make a mark in your corner of the world that nobody but you can make. Think of it that way. Think of every day past, and you look back, you start a new day, you jump out of bed saying, what mark am I going to make today that only I can do? Even asking that question, you're already ahead of the game. Even asking such a question, because it's about appreciating that you have something that could make that type of mark. Now, every person here has unique skills. There's no question about it. You know, I've talked about this in previous classes, previous years. I actually have an article that some of you are probably familiar with, but if not, I'll be happy to email it to you, or the link. It's called How to Discover Your Personal Mission Statement. And in it, I write about basically what questions to ask to identify your own particular skills or your strengths or your unique, and I broke it into like, I guess, lack of a better, a POPP, 4 things. You know, personality, opportunities, people, and places. That each of us have unique type of personality. Some people are a cerebral personality, emotional, creative, very practical. Some are very good at implementing, others are good at innovating. You know, maybe we have sometimes more than one strength, obviously. But even identifying that helps us see what is your strength. And this is your strength, your unique strength. And then we have our opportunities. You have opportunities that I don't have, and I have opportunities you don't have, due to life circumstances, due to different situations that we've been in. You know, people have gone through difficult situations. They have a certain opportunity. They know they have a sensitivity that others don't have, and so on. And then there are the people we know. Each of us have our sphere of influence, our sphere of family and friends. And they're your people and not my people, and so on. And then finally, there are the places we've been to. The places we were born, the place we were born, the places we've traveled to, we've lived, places we identify with. And it's also very diverse. Everyone here has their own trajectory in the journeys of your life. Don't underestimate, when you combine these 4 things and you like map it out a bit, you can discover a lot of things about yourself you may not even be aware of. Because these are the things that are the givens of your life, these 4. I'm not limiting it to those 4, but almost everything fits into those 4 categories. So when you start even just stepping back and asking yourself these questions, you know, how would I identify my personality, my strengths? You'll be surprised at the answers, because you'll also find another thing, that we're often trapped in areas of our lives that don't allow us to express our strengths in all those 4 areas. Because a job, you may be in a job that you hate, or you may be in a job that's not really particularly your strength, but you need to make a living, so that's what you do. And your real strengths just remain dormant, or like waiting to, I don't know, somewhere to express themselves, or maybe don't express themselves. You think that is not going to eat away at you? Of course it does. Remember, any faculty within a person that's not used is destructive. It's like it implodes. Now, God forbid, I mentioned atrophy. Imagine you decided, I don't say you, anyone, but imagine you decided to put your hand and keep it on a table and not move it all day. Is that healthy? It's not going to be healthy. Same thing in a more broader sense of the word. You're able to write and you don't write. You're able to sing and you don't sing. You're able to express, you have another talent and you never express it. What happens with it? You think it just like disappears? What happens is it eats away at you. Because your soul wants to express it. As I said, the soul wants to produce. A human being has strengths inside of you, and it wants to express itself. The language the soul speaks to us when it doesn't express itself is actually a different type of language. It doesn't tell you, hey, listen, I have a talent waiting for you to express me. It tells you, it causes you to become anxious. You become anxious. Anxiety is the language of the soul telling you, I'm deprived. It's like a hungry soul. That's anxiety. That's really where it comes from. And I'm not talking about every type of anxiety. I'm sure there's clinical anxiety and there's other forms of it. But a lot of anxiety, the ones that come and go, are very much a direct result of a impoverished spirit and psyche that's waiting for something, that wants something, and it feels empty. And so identifying, not waiting for crisis, as I said, but identifying some of these strengths you have. That's no strengths, some of the unique opportunities, as I said, personality, opportunities, people and places, can tremendously help you understand your life. Now, you may then have to figure out, okay, what can I do about it? I have a job that's not aligned with necessarily all my strengths. But remember, that's also Hashgacha Pratis. That's also divine providence. Why are you in that job? You know? So are you just a victim? Or, as I said, you can wake up every morning and say, how could I make a mark? How could I change things? I mean, just think of life, how it would be if you knew that from the morning the moment you wake up, that wherever you go, even on a subway, saying something nice to a stranger. Or other interactions we have with strangers, with known people, with so on. But you think in terms of, I'm here to illuminate, to bring light, to shape, not to be shaped. That can change your entire life. Just taking that proactive attitude, because ultimately it comes down to two things. Either you're going to shape or you're going to be shaped. But either you're going to influence or you'll be influenced. I know it sounds like, why can't there be a middle ground, like neither? It doesn't work that way. There is no neither. You walk down the street, you're either taking in all the images or you're not. Or you're projecting images. There's no two ways about it. It doesn't mean everything has the deepest impact on you, but we live in a world that's interactive. There's no way to just be in a vacuum and say, you know what, I won't be influenced by anything and I won't influence. It doesn't exist. It's impossible, especially in our interactive world. Now, I'm not even mentioning mobile units and all the gadgets and technologies that we use. Even basically on a human level. On a human level. You know, you have a friend who has strong influence on you, and sometimes it's a bad influence. The only alternative is either you drop the friend, or you start influencing that friend. Instead of being the recipient, the taker, you become the giver. And this is true in every type of interaction. And I don't mean this in an arrogant sense that you are here now to bestow your gifts. It's actually a humble sense. That you were blessed with gifts, and you're blessed with the power to make an impact on things. So I said, we're not even told this message enough. And even when we hear it, the first times I heard it, it was like, to me, wow, that's pretty interesting. And then when you start really thinking about it, this is the message that should be told to a child 1,000,000 times a day, if not more. This should be told to adults, to friends, that you have what it takes to make an impact. Now, just knowing it is what builds the confidence. Hearing it from someone you respect, or hearing it from someone you trust, people who, that itself is powerful. And of course, when you don't hear that, the other message is equally powerful, which is the disempowering message that you don't really have what it takes. Or every time you get enthusiastic, guaranteed that you have a whole list of friends that can definitely throw cold water on you and make sure to remind you that you can't do it. You know, you haven't done it till now, and so on. You know, I know a woman who's been dating and trying to find, she almost always finds the right guy, but it always doesn't work out. So lately she's been dating someone actually I think is going to work. But her friends, of course, have to remind her that don't be naive, it's not going to work, it's never worked. You know, so I told her basically to drop all those friends and move out of that neighborhood, to be very honest. Because it's definitely not going to, I mean, how could that help? You know, how could that help? Because even if something is possible, well, you're reminded, you know, it's not going to work. So then you project, and then you, of course, as they say, the way the neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. And once they get wired with negative impressions, that becomes your own reality. You start writing your own self-defeating prophecy. So here we have it. We have a chapter, thank God, that reminds us, lech lecha, that you have the power to make a move. And all of us have our routines, have our comfort zones that we need to deal with. Everybody has their comfort zones. In Tanya, the classic work, a mystical work, as I mentioned, Rav Shneir Zalman, in chapter 15, in case you want to research it. It's a very powerful chapter. He talks about habit and routine and serving God. Now, what is service? What is work? He says something very fascinating there. He says like this, that in the olden times, in the times of the Talmud, so they would study, there were a lot of students and sages. So there was a custom, that was the custom of the time, that when you studied something in the yeshiva, in the academy, you would repeat and review it 100 times, 100 times. That was what was required. 100 times reviewing what you studied. If you studied some text, 100 times you had to review it. That was the custom. But the Talmud says the following, that someone who studies 100 times is considered as someone who does not serve. Lo yavadeh. Someone who goes one over the 100, one more time, 101st, that's considered a person who serves. Eved Elikim. Eved Hashem. And he asks why. 100 times is a lot of times. You know, it's a lot. I mean, imagine studying something 100 times. That's not easy. But because that was the habit then. That was the routine. Everyone did it. When something is a routine, it doesn't matter how many times you did it. Even though compared to us, we don't do 100. That's for us, it's not routine. But when it is a routine, it's not considered to be going out of your comfort zone. What's going out of your comfort zone? That one time. Obviously, it's not one. It's 1 over 100. You know, it's not like... So that one has more power qualitatively than the 100 quantitatively. Because it's not your routine. So people who are charitable, or people who are giving, from a Torah point of view, it's not enough. If it's a routine, then it's still your comfort zone. And to really want to be like a creator, you want to really grow and produce, and really do what you have to do, is you go a little more. You go a little beyond your strengths. And this is true in any type of effort. It's actually quite difficult, because it's one thing going from a bad habit to a good habit. You know, a bad habit is hard to break. But we all understand, you know, a bad habit, I'll work on it. It makes sense. I want to break a bad habit to find a good habit. But if you have a good habit, you know, what's the motivation? Why should I try even more than that? I'm ready, it's already good. But it still becomes mechanical, by rote. It's your comfort zone. And from a context of growth, of constant renewal, of really what your soul needs, something new, it's a new day, therefore it needs a new additional power to go a little beyond even your strengths. And that's more difficult. It's easier to go from bad to good than from good to better. Even though I think the French remind us that the enemy of good is better. You know, that's when you're producing something, you don't want to keep waiting till perfection because you'll never get anything done. But on the other hand, once you got it done, you should always be perfecting it. And perfection is that process. And you see this, you look at people who are motivated by money or profit. You see, they're never satisfied. There's no such thing as, okay, you know, I have $1 million and I'm going to be happy. $1 million, you want 2. And if you don't want the 2, it means the $1 million you didn't really appreciate. So it's a matter of a constant growth. I mean, money is sometimes an example because it's a motivating factor. But from the soul's point of view, it's not the money, it's the accomplishment. The ability to continuously produce, to create. There was once this elderly gentleman who was aging, he was already in his late 80s. And he was in his life he produced a lot. He was a well-beloved teacher and, you know, really had made an impact. But at that point he was getting older and then he fell sick. What happened was he retired. You know, and that's when he started getting sick. So he went to see the Rebbe and asked him for a blessing for the illness. So the Rebbe said to him, I'll give you a blessing and I'm sure hopefully it'll help, but best of all is go back to your work. Now, obviously do it in a way that works with your schedule and your health, your age. But you see, what's happening is you started feeling not needed. You feel like, okay, I'm no longer producing. I got now too old. When you'll feel like you're producing again, it won't allow the illness in. The illness was like almost like a side effect of his giving in, resignation. Now this doesn't mean guaranteed that every illness is solved by just producing, but many, many illnesses are connected very much to a person's self-confidence. You know, like they say, God forbid someone in a hospital doesn't have any visitors or guests. It doesn't help your immune system if there's no hope. If people give up, people who have friends who love them and show that they want them, it affects us. It affects even the healing process. This has been demonstrated because you have a willpower. When you have a willpower, you fight and you want to fight. So this is very much part of the same idea. The soul wants to produce. Now, obviously, different stages in life, you produce in different measure in different ways. But whoever said that an 89-year-old cannot produce, as a matter of fact, because of wisdom and experience, I would say an 80-year-old in 5 minutes can give you more wisdom than a 20-year-old with all the energy in the world, because they have the life experience. So it's just a matter of what form or shape it takes. Now here I'm talking, I know, to everyone who's under 30 here, so that's not relevant, but I was just talking to myself as I age, trying to remind myself to keep producing. So, my friends, here to tell you that you have everything it takes to change the world, to take on the world. Carpe diem, to seize the day. And here we have the first documented episode of getting out of the comfort zone. Abraham, charted the path, pioneered the course. So we have a good grandfather. We have good genes that help us pave the way. But each of us can make that little mark. And you can't imagine, it's hard to imagine, but once you do, you get a taste for it, you want more. It's changing sometimes the mentality that you're not anyone's victim, you're not a victim of circumstances, you're not just a receiver or a taker of the environment around you. You can shape it. You can shape it because you have inside of you that soul, the divine soul, the creator within you. And I want to see some real products, fruits from all of you. Don't do it for me, do it for yourself, but it would be nice to see. And each of us empowers each other by, when you're around, as I said, people who do it, it spills over because it gives confidence and builds confidence. So it's always like being great on a good, it always feels great to be on a team that is a producing team, because it empowers, you feel part of it, you feel necessary, you feel others are dependent on you. So get yourself mobilized, draft yourself into some army for a good cause, I don't mean with arms and artillery, I mean more on a spiritual war, and maybe all together conquer new, horizons, and know that we have the abilities, we have all the tools that's necessary to do so. And please see me as an ally, as a friend, and we all can, as I said, empower each other. And with that being said, I would like to also announce that tomorrow night Philip will be giving his class. Philip Namaworth, those that go to his class or are interested, either ask me or just call our office. And if you have not left your email address, please do so we can stay in touch. There's some developments coming up, which I shall announce in the near future, different areas. For those online, by the way, we're changing our whole systems because all the new platforms, including mobile and Apple and all that, you need to have new systems, so we're going to be upgrading finally. That should be happening in the next few weeks. And with that we can do more programs, of course. And what else can I say? And everyone should have a very blessed week, a productive week. And when you're riding in a cab tomorrow or tonight or in a subway or whoever you meet, try it out. Test it slowly, and you slowly build your confidence by saying something. Take an initiative. Do something. That tragic story that I saw. I'm sure many of you saw that video in China. A little kid that was, and just everyone ignored me. To me, it's mind-boggling. But that's like the epitome of the opposite of not just not doing anything, but completely ignoring, as if. I don't want. If you haven't seen it, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned it. But anyway, just a classic example tragic example of complacency of people, lack of care. I know some people say it's China, so many people there, and so on. But unfortunately, America is also known of some such indifference. So the opposite, of course, is that we are here to help people, and your life you're sent down to this world to make an impact, to illuminate. The Baal Shem Tov said this actually to one of the great tzaddikim, the Mordechai tzaddik, who was a hidden tzaddik, and he was obviously achieved much in his life. And still, he said to him the following: that a neshama, soul, comes down to earth and wears and tears 70, 80 years just to do a favor for another. That means that your soul can come down for many reasons, but the main reason was to help another person. That means, in simple terms, as I said, that you can create, you can produce, you can influence. So may this be a very influencing week. And the more you influence, the less you will be influenced. So that, think of it that way. So there's a good return. And we shall be back here next Wednesday. And thank you all for being honoring me to be part of your spiritual journey, or material journey, or whatever we call it. And until next week, everybody have a very good night. Thank you very much.